Is God necessary for moral values to exist? Christians and some philosophers will say absolutely. There's no way you can have any moral values as objective truth without a God or lawgiver, especially William Lane Craig. Today, Dr. Peter Singer joins us, and not only does he say that God is not necessary, he believes in objective moral values. I've been saying subjective moral values from a natural worldview. I wonder what you guys think about this. And don't forget, we've got hundreds of videos on Patreon to join. Thank you, Anthony Guthrie, for making this happen. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I am your host, Derek Lambert. We're going to be talking about, do you need God to have ethics, morals, things like that? And so we're going to get there. But before we do, we have, as you can see on the screen, Peter Singer, Dr. Peter Singer. Thank you. And how is it over there in Australia?
We're doing pretty well, actually. Thanks. We've managed to get rid of the virus here. We haven't got any local cases at all now. So we're feeling a bit more relaxed.
You guys are doing way better than we are over here. But at least people are getting vaccinated, and I'm fully Pfizered out. I've got both my shots, and I'm good to go. Tell us a little bit about this. You've got a book right now coming out. I ask everybody to go in the description, petersinger.info. You can check out his website that he has. Lots of writings, and you have done a ton of work. But tell us about your latest work, if you don't mind.
Well, my latest work is certainly something rather different from me, perhaps the least serious of all of the books that I've had something to do with. It's an ancient novel called The Golden Ass, as in the sense of donkey, written in the 2nd century by Apuleius, who was an African, lived in what is now Algeria, but under the Roman Empire at that time. And he wrote this amazing story about a man who gets turned into a donkey. And then the rest of the story is told essentially by the donkey. So you get a sense of what life was like for a donkey in the Roman Empire. And it wasn't pretty, I have to say, in many respects. But the author has a sense of humor. There's a kind of wry humor about the behavior of other people. Some of them are good to him. Some of them are just sadistic. Some of them just need to get a lot of work out of him and beat him to get him to work. So remarkable empathy for an animal, given the times, that this is the time when, of course, people used to flock to watch animals tear each other to bits in the Colosseum. And it's a funny story. It's a bit sexy. There's a couple of sexual episodes in it. The Romans didn't mind describing that. So it's a lot of fun, and I hope people will pick it up, and you can say, hey, I've read what may well be the oldest surviving novel that has come down to us.
Wow. Well said. Thank you so much for introducing us. Make sure you guys check out the description. You guys can help support him by purchasing the work, but also educate yourself in the process. And I really do appreciate that. I got to give a huge shout out right now, Dr. Singer, to my really good friend, Anthony Guthrie. Thank you, man. I appreciate you for real, more than you know. And I appreciate you making things possible for us. And so some of these questions actually are from him. And I have the same motives as he does on trying to learn and understand these things. So we've covered the project that you have currently out. Do you have any upcoming projects that you're working on right now?
I'm working on revising my book, Animal Liberation. When I was a lot younger, right back in 1975, I published Animal Liberation, which has had a big impact. Some people refer to it as the Bible of the modern animal rights movement. I'm not big on Bibles myself. I don't want people to have a kind of reverential attitude to what I write. I'd like them to think about what I write, and if they want to criticize it, that's perfectly fine. But the main text has got out of date. It's still in print, with some new prefaces and so on, but I want to revise the whole thing to show that unfortunately, many of the things I talked about, the bad things we do to animals in laboratories, in factory farms, are still going on. Yes, there have been some small improvements, but essentially we still treat animals as if they existed for our benefit, not as if they have lives of their own to lead, that their lives can go well or badly, that they have, there's something what it's like, basically, and this is the point again, going back to the golden ass, it shows there's something that it's like to be a donkey who's, treated in certain ways. And there's something that it's like to be a mouse or a rat in a laboratory. There's something that it's like to be a chicken or a pig on a factory farm. And we need to give that weight. We need to take account of what we're doing to all beings who are conscious and can feel things. And basically, we do that now for dogs and cats and the ones that we think are cute, and we care about pandas and so on. But, when it comes to the vast majority of the animals that humans are exploiting, we don't care.
Well, Dr. Singer, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a moral argument, because the moral argument is a favorite cornerstone of apologists. For context, William Lane Craig, Dr. Craig's version reads as such: if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties do not exist, therefore God exists. Oh, I'm sorry. He says objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. What are your thoughts about this argument that he's always using in debates with people? Are there issues with it that you can see?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the big issue is how does he leap from the fact that if God doesn't exist, there is no objective morality? So should we say if God doesn't exist, there are no objective truths, let's say in mathematics, that it's not true that 2 + 2 = 4 if God doesn't exist? No, I think, there are truths of reason, which we see in mathematics, that have nothing to do with the belief in God. And any creature capable of reasoning would be able to work out that 2 + 2 = 4. And I think that there are truths of reasoning that hold ethically as well. So I think that there are some things that are self-evident, rather like what I was just talking about, okay, that there's something bad about a creature suffering unnecessarily. So let's say, again, let's go back to the golden ass. There's an episode where the donkey falls into the hands of a sadistically inclined boy who straps a whole lot of branches and sort of dry timber onto his back and then sets fire to it, just for the fun. So that's a bad thing to do. And I think that that's objectively bad because it's causing a being to suffer, and to suffer extremely. Fortunately, the donkey escapes. I won't spoil the story of how the donkey escapes, but the donkey does. But, assuming the donkey hadn't and slowly burnt to death, that would be suffering, causing a creature to suffering just because it amuses you. And I think that that's objectively wrong. Nothing to do with the existence of God. I think if there were aliens from other planets and they could feel pain too, they should be able to understand that it's objectively wrong to inflict pain for amusement on us or on themselves. So I don't see that William Lane Craig has produced a reason why you need to believe in God to think that these things are objectively true.
It's interesting you use the word objective, because most of the atheists that I encounter, including myself, I've caught myself saying morality is subjective. And maybe I'm talking about like a social morality, the way we construct certain rules. But when you use objective morality, the way that I've been listening to you, and I've been watching you on YouTube all day today, like it sounds almost evolutionary in the sense that we all are experiencing something similar here, and we all know what is the best for survival in our the best for our living and our well-being seems to be an objective thing we could hold on to and say, hey, this is it. But it, like, the word objective to them, you got to have a lawgiver saying that that's objective. Someone has to say with absolute certainty that that's objective. But it sounds like the way you're describing it, that's pretty objective. And can you elaborate a little bit on that? Why atheists say it's subjective rather than objective?
Well, right. Look, if philosophers disagree, about the nature of morality. That's true. They disagree about most things. And there are some philosophers who think that morality is subjective. I was one of them for some time, but I've become persuaded by some of my colleagues in particular that that's not necessarily so. If people really want to look at this, there's what is now a massive 3-volume work called On What Matters by the late Oxford philosopher Derek Parfit, which discusses this at some length, and I think is convincing. And there are earlier philosophers too who argued for the objectivity of morality. So I think that's we can regard this as objective. I'm a bit cautious about what you said about bringing in evolution, because evolution itself has no moral direction. Evolution is just a process. It explains how we got to be how we are, and the diversity of species that we see on this planet. But it doesn't justify the idea that somehow survival is the ultimate objective, or that anything we do to help us to survive is good. Some people have interpreted it that way, but Darwin didn't. Darwin himself didn't claim that he had produced a basis for a theory of morality, and I think it's a mistake to think of that. What is true, as you mentioned, is that we learn what conduces to our well-being. It's not always the same as what conduces to the survival and propagation of our genes. I think once we've developed sort of rational self-awareness, we can look at why we are as we are, and we can see that some of these tendencies are not good. We've just seen an example of that in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. I don't think anybody thinks that was a desirable thing for either Israel or the people in Gaza. And that no doubt comes from some kind of evolved tendency to respond strongly to people who attack you, maybe to overreact. And perhaps it comes from some kind of xenophobia as well, or, anyway, some sort of group loyalty to your own group, which we've seen cause a lot of terrible wars, and is not a good thing, but may well be something that's evolved. So we need to think about what is going to improve the well-being of ourselves and of all of those affected by our actions. And I think that's the objective goal that we ought to be aiming at, not necessarily what conduces to the survival of any particular group or individual.
Thank you. Leviticus 24:44-46 and other passages of the Bible explicitly support slavery, including owning foreign slaves, which in your book, it sounds like this donkey might be hinting at the situation even during the time in Rome. But either way, in the Bible, it kind of condones this idea to support slavery, including owning foreign slaves as property forever, being able to pass them on as inheritance and beat them to an extent. This is supposedly a direct regulation from God. Does that make the practice of moral per divine command theory?
Well, I suppose somebody could say what is good is what God commands, but the Bible gets it wrong as to what God commands, because this couldn't have been good. And in fact, that's not the only example, right? There's the episode with the Midianites where God commands genocide. He commands, wiping out the Midianites, except for the
virgins.
The virgins, exactly. That's right. And those you're supposed to take. In other words, those you're supposed to rape, whether they want you or not. So clearly, either the divine command theory doesn't hold, or this is not an accurate statement of what God commanded. It can't be any other way.
I feel like that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to linger here too long and move to the next point, but I feel like God has evolved on purpose because of these issues. People are seeing through this. It looks like God looks more like an Iron Age or a Bronze Age man than an actual philosophical divine foundation to all existence or intelligent design that has evolved into. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I do. Yes, I'm clearly. God was very partisan. You can see God was very partisan to the Israelites. He was their God, if you like, and he was on their side. And he didn't seem to care that much about what happened to some of the others who were in conflict, rivals, maybe for the land with the Israelites. So yeah, he was a God of that almost tribal era, I suppose, when each tribe had its own set of gods and believed that their gods were more powerful than the other gods.
Thank you for answering that. What are recent advancements in neuroscience and other fields helping us understand about the study of ethics and morality? Because I really appreciate your philosophy and how you're approaching this. A lot of philosophers ignore the science, or they don't really care to know neuroscience and the science that is out there. So can you maybe touch on some things that are advancing currently in this and how it helps in your studies?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting field. And some of the most interesting work has been done by Josh Green, who's a professor of psychology at Harvard, relating to the trolley problem. Now, many of your listeners will know about the trolley problem, but just to remind you, there are two versions of the trolley problem. In one, they both involve a runaway trolley or train going down the tracks and a switch. Well, one of them is a switch. So in the switch version, you're standing by the tracks. You see this runaway trolley. You look down the track, the main track, and you see that there are 5 workers on the track, and the trolley is going to kill them, hit them, and kill them all. But there's one thing you can do. You can throw this switch, and it will run down a side track, and it will kill 1 person rather than 5. So the question there is, should you throw the switch or not? And most people do say you should throw the switch. About 80% say you should throw the switch, only 20% say you shouldn't. In the second version, again, there's the runaway trolley, but this time there's no switch. There's a bridge, a footbridge over the line. And again, the trolley is going to go straight down the track and kill 5 people. Because there's no switch, you can't divert it. But there's a very big, heavy person standing on the footbridge, leaning over the tracks. And you calculate that if you just give this person a nudge, he'll fall onto the tracks and the trolley will hit him. And he's so big that the trolley will come to a stop. But of course, he's going to be killed by the impact with the trolley. So in that case, too, it's a question of, will you bring about the death of 1 in order to save 5? But most people say no. It's pretty much reversed, like only 20% say yes and 80% say no. And the puzzle is, so why do most people think in one case, yes, it's okay to bring about the death of 1 to save 5, in the other case, it's not okay? And the difference has something to do with the fact that you have to push this guy clearly onto the track. Whereas in the other one, although you are killing them, you're killing them by flicking a switch indirectly. Now, Josh Green was interested in this, a bit puzzled by this decision. So he asked people these questions while they were having their brain scanned, while they were having fMRI imaging done. And the interesting thing that he came up with was that for those, particularly in the second case, the footbridge case, most of the people, when they were asked, the parts of their brain that were most active were those involved with emotional responses. So they had a strong emotional or intuitive, yuck response to the idea of pushing the stranger off the bridge. In the minority of people who said, yes, it was okay, there was much more activity in the parts of the brain involved with cognitive activities, with thinking, in other words, with reasoning. And those people clearly were more influenced by reasoning, well, it's 1 life or 5 lives, which is how people were generally in the switch case. Most people were reasoning, not so emotionally evolved in the switch case. So Green's hypothesis here is that we have inherited certain innate emotional responses to things using physical force. Why? Because for all of our evolutionary history, we were capable of killing people by, let's say, pushing them off a cliff or something like that, or laying hands on them anyway, using physical violence against them. So we evolved an emotional response against doing that because we're social animals, and if we hadn't, the societies would have come apart, not been cohesive, and we wouldn't have survived. But we never evolved an emotional response to throwing switches, because they've only existed for a couple of 100 years, and that's not time to evolve an emotional response. So that's why we can coolly, when we're faced with a switch case, we can coolly think of what's the best thing to do. Oh, it's better that only 1 person die rather than 5 people die. But when we're asked to sort of violently push somebody off a high place, the emotions swamp our reasoning. So I found that interesting, and I think it supports the view that I would take, that there is a basis in reasoning to ethics, and that in fact it suggests that really both these cases are similar, that in both cases the right thing to do is the thing that the people who are reasoning more and not so emotional would do in both cases, and that is bring about the death of one in order to save five.
It makes me think with all of the gun policies that have come, especially in Australia, you can't own a weapon. Here in North Carolina, you can own a weapon. You can get them pretty much anywhere. I wonder if we're going to build some. I think if there's already an emotional rise on this whole, the switch is the gun. I'm wondering if that is something that is on the rise right now in light of your example or Green's example. That's a really interesting example because while you were describing it, imagining me pushing, I felt an emotional response just thinking about what it would require for me to save those five people. So I think that's interesting in how we've evolved with these things. So I guess if you don't mind, you mentioned this briefly, but I hear people argue that evolution, there's evolutionary ethics, or if you will, naturalistic ethics. You disagree with that idea. Can you elaborate a little more in why that is?
Yes, certainly, yes. So there's been a long tradition in ethics to say that the right thing to do is to act in accordance with our nature. That goes back to Aristotle, who, of course, didn't know anything about evolution. But with Darwin and with our understanding of evolution, there have been some people who have turned that into a kind of evolutionary ethics. But I think it is still a mistake. People who want to follow a natural law ethic, say we should act in accordance with our nature, have to deal with the fact that humans are aggressive. As I said, just going back to the current conflict, or maybe recent conflict, let's hope that the ceasefire holds. Going back to that, we can see that people can act aggressively, and of course there have been much, more clear-cut cases of waging aggressive war, as in Hitler's war, and a lot of going back through history, Genghis Khan's raids on people. There's unfortunately, human history is just replete with examples of people who wanted to conquer, wanted to kill others, wanted to extend their power. And so if you want to say, well, we ought to act in accordance with our nature, you have to somehow explain that, do away with it, because people don't want to say, yeah, it's good to be aggressive and to kill innocent people who you've got power over. So they then say, well, human nature got corrupted here in some way. But you have to explain why this is a corruption of human nature, whereas helping people in need is not a corruption of human nature. So you have to assume that somehow our nature is benign and benevolent, social, and so on. And that just doesn't seem to be scientifically accurate. What is accurate is that we have both of these tendencies, and in different circumstances and different conditions, both of them can emerge. So I don't think we can just say we ought to follow our nature or follow the way we've evolved. I think what we should say is we have evolved the capacity to reason. No doubt we evolved this because it helped us to survive in various situations, helped us to solve a lot of problems. But having evolved the capacity to reason gives us the ability to assess the different aspects of our nature and to decide what's the right thing to do. And I think having evolved the capacity of reason, we really can't avoid seeing that we are just one among many people, among many sentient beings on the planet, that objectively speaking, if I suffer pain, that's not more important than if you suffer pain or if some stranger suffers pain, that the universe doesn't play favorites like that. It's all pain. Pain is pain. And unless it instrumentally serves some good purpose, then it would be better not to have it. So that's where I think our reason takes us. And it therefore takes us away from the idea that we should just follow our evolved nature, no matter where that might take us.
So this is interesting. And another way of putting it is, thanks to us evolving to the level we have with the cortex and the depth that we have of thinking capacity as humans to reason and make choices, it's thanks to evolution that we now can kind of break out of what our nature would naturally draw us to try and create ethics and push ourselves further in a way that we wouldn't have usually in the past. Is that a better way of putting it, maybe?
Yes, absolutely. That's right. Yeah, we've become self-aware, not just as individuals, but as a species. We've learnt, we have accumulated knowledge, and we've learnt how it is that we happen to be the way we are now. And we can think about that, and we can think about what we want to do about that and what tendencies we have that we need to guard against that might be bad for us and bad for others, might even imperil our survival. If you have things like our tendencies just to think of ourselves and our own comfort, and therefore not to limit our use of fossil fuels or of consumption of meat, which could heat the planet and could be bad for everyone. We're aware of that now. Our ancestors could never have known about that. Of course, they never had the capacity to heat the planet the way we've been doing. But now we're aware of that. We can think about, well, what can we do about that? What restrictions can we have? What agreements can we make? And so we can guide our future development in ways that are better than just a kind of laissez-faire, let everybody act according to their nature and do what they want.
Thank you for answering that. Religion is dropping sharply in the US. For example, a 2020 Gallup poll indicated that only 47% of Americans said that they belong to a church, synagogue, mosque, and there has been a wave of ex-evangelicals, ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and more. What do you expect the next decade to look like for religiosity, if you will, in the United States? And what effect might these shifts have? Why do you think people are leaving?
Well, to me, the bigger puzzle is, why did people in the United States take so long to leave, right? Because, when I noticed this, I came to Princeton in 1999, and a lot of people asked me, I came from Australia, a lot of people ask me, so, what's different about America? And of course, there's many superficial differences between America and Australia. But one thing I really noticed was that people in America, even around, Princeton and New York, the Northeast, I'm not just thinking about the South, were significantly more religious than in Australia. And I wasn't sure why, but, I guess I got some sense that people needed to belong to some community in America, and that they got that through their church, synagogue, or mosque. And whereas people in Australia maybe had other ways of connecting with their community, they were less isolated. They didn't need a religious group to do that. They had other kinds of associations. So that might have been part of it, that it served a social function in America. I'm not really sure, but it certainly was, and to some extent still is, a more potent force. I mean, say abortion hasn't been a serious political issue in Australia for the last 25 years. It's not like there's a major political party that is saying we want to ban abortion. And it has been in America, obviously, and still is. And who knows, the Supreme Court may revive that again in the next coming months. And that's substantially backed by, of course, religious people who think that abortion is against the law of God or something of that sort. So I think that's that's one example of the power of religion, and it's not that easy to explain why it's stronger in the US, and of course not only than in Australia, but essentially in Europe and most of the sort of more affluent developed countries of the world. Religion has been in decline for quite a long time.
You mentioned abortion. I figure I'd ask quickly for a sweet answer. I'm sure you might have a quick one, but maybe you can explain a little. Is aborting a child objectively immoral? And I know it's probably a gray area. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you think there's any immoral act in that? Where would you draw the line?
So I think one significant place to draw the line, in keeping with what I was saying before about animals, is is the fetus capable of feeling anything? Is the fetus a sentient being? Or are we talking about a fetus before the brain has developed and the nervous system has developed to the point where there could be consciousness? And the overwhelming majority of abortions are done before that stage. What is somewhat grey is exactly when that occurs, but it's not going to be earlier than 20 weeks. And some people think it might be later than 24 weeks even, some before there's really consciousness. But let's say we're talking about 20 weeks to be reasonably safe. Well, I'm not sure what the figures are, but it would be 95% of abortions would be performed before 20 weeks. So they're being performed on a being who is not conscious in any way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Essentially, I think a woman should be able to do that for whatever reason she chooses. It's true, of course, that then there will not be another child. But that's true if you use contraception as well. And very few people think that it's wrong to use contraception. And almost nobody thinks that it's wrong to abstain from sexual intercourse during the woman's fertile period. Even the Catholic Church thinks that's fine. So that has the effect that there won't be a child as well. So I don't think the fact that you have an entity, I'm prepared to say you have a living human being, if you like, from conception, but it's not a conscious or sentient living human being. And so I think that there isn't really a problem about ending the life of a being before it's really begun in the sense of a biographical life, in the sense of a life of someone having experiences.
So final question, and then I hope we can do this again in the future, because I'm currently going through a lot of your work and I love what I'm reading. I'm learning a lot from you, and where you were ahead of your time when you first published a lot of this work. It was really interesting to see how you viewed the animal kingdom. And I don't know, I admire what you do. So my final question is the issue of consciousness. There's this really tough philosophical and neuroscience explanation of what is consciousness and like, what does it mean? And philosophers sometimes, and I don't mean this for you, but like a lot of them in the field, they use this like fluff language, and it's almost like Deepak Chopra, and like, you're like, what is he even saying? I don't even understand him. But I recently interviewed Dr. Mark Solms on his book, The Hidden Spring, trying to understand, where's it come from? What is it? And I'm looking into neuroscience to try and understand, is consciousness purely a material thing from us, produced from our brains? And, how do you answer that? The problem of consciousness?
Well, consciousness itself is not a material thing, but it must have a basis in our brains. I believe that it requires a complex brain to produce consciousness, which is not to say that it has to be a biological entity. I can imagine artificial intelligence getting to the complexity where consciousness emerges, but there is still something somewhat mysterious about how consciousness emerges from material things. I mean, I don't claim to have all of the answers to that. And there are very good philosophers who are not religious, who think that this is something that is very difficult for science to really explain or elaborate. Thomas Nagel is one philosopher that I have in mind, who's worth looking at that. So yeah, there are things we don't quite understand, I guess, how it is that we know we have feelings, we know we have thoughts. Obviously, we're thinking now. You're listening to this. There's consciousness going on, and we also know that damage to the brain particular parts of the brain can eliminate that consciousness or change that consciousness. And that's, neuroscience is telling us more about that in more detail than we knew before. But in terms of explaining exactly what it is that provides the basis for that consciousness, I don't really know the answer to that question.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to petersinger.info, or I almost said .com, petersinger.info, and check out his website. He has the new book that he's recently published, and it's The Golden Ass. It sounds very intriguing. I'm interested in seeing what you have here. You got this really nice green book popping out of my face, and makes me wonder, about veganism. Are you a vegan?
Yeah, I call myself a flexible vegan. It's not a religion for me. And if occasionally some animal product passes through my lips, I'm not going to be troubled about it. But so if it's really inconvenient, if I'm eating with others and there's nothing vegan, as long as there's something vegetarian, I'm likely to take it. But by and large, I am eating vegan. That's what I choose for myself. I think it's the best way to be, both in terms of not harming animals, not being complicit in factory farming, reducing our contribution to greenhouse gases and climate change. And now, of course, we realize that there's a real danger from viruses spreading from animals, including from factory farmed animals. And we've had epidemics and pandemics before that have come out of factory farms. So that's another reason for trying to avoid supporting the factory farm industry.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here on MythVision. I definitely look forward to doing this again with you. Ladies and gentlemen, go down into my recommended book. You'll see the MythVision recommended books down there in the description. Click that. You're definitely going to find his work in there. I hope you guys check him out. And let me know if you guys want us to do a follow-up interview. I'll let him know and we'll plan it out. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Singer. I appreciate your time and your insights.
You're very welcome, Derek. It's been really good talking to you.
You too. And ladies and gentlemen, never forget, we are MythVision.